Wanted to talk a little bit more about Bibi Netanyahu and what he might be thinking in this moment. So excited to welcome Scot Horton. He's with the Libertarian Institute and also antiwar.com. Great to see you, sir.
Good to see you, man.
Thank you very much for having me, both of you.
So let's start with this. Put this news article up on the screen. We mentioned this earlier from The Intercept. They're reporting Netanyahu's goal for Gaza, quote, thin population to a minimum. He has apparently tasked one of his top advisors with coming up with a plan to, quote unquote, thin the population and pressure the U.S. to go along with this plan. Scott, I wanted to talk to you because you have sort of studied Netanyahu and his political ideology and how he's operated for a long time. So when you see a headline like that, what is your reaction to it? And, you know, how does this dovetail with Netanyahu's political ideology throughout his career?
Well, I mean, I just with the last thing first there, I think this represents the complete failure of the Netanyahu doctrine and his panic. He has to keep the war going as long as he can to stay in office, and he has to try to figure out how to make his legacy as the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history be anything other than the catastrophe of October the 7th. And so he's got to come up with something, and this is his brilliant idea, is he's going to cleanse the Gaza Strip. All this talk about targeting Hamas, they've been talking out of both sides of their mouths for 2 months now, right? Maybe we'll just get rid of all the Palestinians. And then they go, no, we're just targeting the bad guys, and we're real sorry if some innocent civilians get in the way, but not that sorry, but it is what it is. And then they go, no, but we really want to kick them all out into the Sinai Peninsula. Or then, I can't even believe this. This alone is world history. That the Wall Street Journal published an article by 2 Israeli ministers saying, you take them.
Yep.
And I mean, this is just incredible. And they've leaked all various kind of trial balloons saying, yeah, we'll give 25,000 to all different countries all around the world. You say you love the Palestinians so much. Why won't you help us cleanse them off of their land? And so this is, I guess, supposed to be Netanyahu's big accomplishment, so he can go down in history as anything other than the guy whose doctrine, the official Netanyahu doctrine, completely blew up in that society's face on October the 7th.
Scott, Daryl Cooper, our mutual friend, recommended that I talk to you. And whenever Daryl tells me that you're a guy who's gone really deep on this, I'm like, he knows the ins and outs. And so something I'm curious, as you talked about the Netanyahu doctrine, if you could take a step back about Netanyahu, his relationship to Hamas, to Palestinian statehood, going back throughout his career, and how a lot of it had culminated not only with October 7th, but with the policy that they're moving towards right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, what the heck? I'll go back to 1996 when he first was prime minister. A guy who ended up being Dick Cheney's guy, David Wurmser, along with Richard Pearl, probably the most powerful of the neoconservatives of the first W. Bush term era. These guys in Douglas Fight, they wrote a plan called a clean break, and it was for Netanyahu. And what it said was, we want regime change in Iraq in order to weaken Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah so that we don't have to live up to the Oslo Accord and give the Palestinians their state. And the thinking is completely crazy, but the idea was that if Israel and or America could do a coup or ultimately a war in Iraq, that Jordan and Turkey would be dominant in Syria, and then they would force the Shiite clergy in Najaf to force Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran and be nice to Israel instead. And then once the pressure on Israel's northern front is relieved, then they won't have to deal in good faith with the Palestinians and negotiate over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So as in the deal, in their sworn promises. So this is the whole point of the Iraq War, of Iraq War II, was to help Israel so they wouldn't have to give justice to the Palestinians. And so, you know, Netanyahu was, and in fact, he later was caught on candid camera, and anyone can watch this on YouTube, bragging about how he fooled Bill Clinton at Wye River and had promised he's going to make these concessions toward a Palestinian state. But Area C is 2/3 of the whole thing, sucker, and all this. He talks all about it. And he says, 80% of Americans support us. It's absurd. America is easily moved. They'll do whatever I tell them. And so then Sharon was prime minister from, I guess, 2000 or very early 01 or very late 2000 through 05 when he had his stroke, or late 05 when he had his stroke. So Sharon had this doctrine. He was also Likud with Netanyahu, although they ended up splitting and he created his own party, Kadima. But he had a policy which avowedly at the time was sabotage of the peace process. They called it disengagement. And you'll hear pro-Israel hawks all the time say, gee, we gave them a Palestinian state in the Gaza Strip and all we got in return is rockets. Well, that's just not true. They withdrew, but they didn't end the occupation. Israel kept complete and total control of the Gaza Strip. Essentially, they just took the warden and the prison guards and moved them to the outer perimeter, but it's still a prison. As nothing like a sovereign state. Israel kept total control over their airspace, their borders, their taxation, their revenue, their fishing rights offshore, every single thing. The occupation didn't end. And in fact, I'll urge your audience to Google these terms. It'll come right up. There's no mistake in it. It's Ariel Sharon formaldehyde. And that's, of course, the preservative that you use for corpses, right, when you're preparing them for burial. And so the quote is from Dov Weissglass. It's Dov with no E, Dov Weissglass. And he worked for Sharon, an advisor to Sharon, and he's explaining to Haaretz the withdrawal. This is, again, the 2005 so-called disengagement. The withdrawal is formaldehyde. It puts the peace process in formaldehyde. It means that with the Palestinians divided and conquered, those in charge in Gaza, they can't resort to participation in any international organizations or any kind of negotiation. And we can say, in fact, he says, with the blessing of the Congress and the president, we got a no one to talk to certificate. You know, like they always say that we just have no partner for peace. Well, we have a no one to talk to certificate, and we won't have to talk to them until Gaza becomes Norway, meaning, I guess, a very polite and harmless and nonviolent society. In other words, never. And then so Ehud Olmert was in there in the meantime between Sharon and Netanyahu. And he was a bit less worse than the two of them, although he was Sharon's guy. But he didn't really make any progress, while he was in there toward any real negotiations. And then when Netanyahu came in, the Netanyahu doctrine basically goes like this. He was coming into a situation where all of the Sunni kings of the Arabian Peninsula, all of them sock puppets of the American empire, essentially, they had promised that they would never normalize relations with Israel until the Palestinians got an independent state. And the Saudis had put forward their peace plan, a very reasonable one, in 2002, and had repeatedly suggested that, I think in 2007, it was the basis of the Annapolis talks, possibly. Anyway, very reasonable proposals for a two-state solution. But then Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, figured out that no, everybody's got a price and the American people can afford to borrow enough from South Korea or somebody to pay it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give Bahrain F-16s. We're going to give UAE F-35s. We're going to forgive Sudanese debt. And we're going to, the Trump administration is going to recognize Morocco's seizure of northern Western Sahara. And with these bribes, and then they're working on Saudi Arabia. These are called the Abraham Accords. And with these bribes, what they did was they succeeded in getting these Sunni sock puppet GCC kingdom regimes to go ahead and normalize relations with Israel, which on the surface is great. That's what we want, is every nation to get along, open trade, lower and lower tariffs, and more commercial relationships, and fewer political relationships so that everybody in the world can get along. That's fine. But what it was really about was screwing the Palestinians. It was saying, you're not going to get your independent state, and you are not going to get independent, citizenship in one state or in any kind of binational state. You lose. And people can go and look at Netanyahu's speech that he gave to the United Nations just 2 weeks before the October 7th attack, where he holds up a piece of paper. He shows the map. He's always got some visual aid. This time he shows the map of one state, from the river to the sea. There's no carved out piece of the West Bank or Gaza there. And what he's saying is, that's it. We won. The Netanyahu doctrine has proved that I do not have to negotiate with the Palestinians. I do not have to concede citizenship, rights, or independence to them. And I can get what I want anyway. And the Palestinians, they're just going to have to get used to living on their bellies. And
Scott,
that's it.
Can you talk a little bit about these quotes that have been attributed to Netanyahu talking about Hamas, where he says, anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. He also said, reportedly, this is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. Can you put those quotes in context for us?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other half of the Netanyahu doctrine right there. So the first part is we want to essentially get over the hurdle of dealing with the Palestinians in order to make a deal with the Sunni Arab states. And then the other half was making sure that Mahmoud Abbas, who, you know, Donald Trump talked about, like, oh, he's such a nice old grandpa. Like, he doesn't come across like Yasser Arafat even, much less Hamas, right? And so that's a real problem from Likud's point of view. They don't even care as much about Gaza. They want that West Bank, that land. And the Palestinians there, they're just in the way. We're going to have to figure that out later. Right now, it's facts on the ground. But if the consensus in America and Europe and what passes for the left in Israel is that, no, we have to deal with Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority and give them a two-state solution, like in the promise, then that ruins the Netanyahu doctrine. They want that land. So in order to prevent that, Netanyahu essentially accelerated that Ariel Sharon policy. Now, just for time, I'll skip this, but I'll drop a great footnote for you, okay? Everybody knows there was the election of '06 where Hamas won a plurality, not a majority, 17 years ago. And then there's a great article called The Gaza Bombshell. You got to read it. It has quotes from David Wormser telling the truth about it in there even. It's incredible. It's The Gaza Bombshell by David Rose, and it's about how they tried to do a coup against Hamas after the election in favor of the PA, but that blew up and failed, and that was how Hamas took over the Strip. And that was, of course, before Netanyahu came back. That was during Ehud Olmert. But then when Netanyahu came back, he decided this is great. Just like with formaldehyde and the Palestinians divided and conquered. Now they're divided and conquered plus. Now, not only are they divided geographically in this way, but now you have Hamas in control of Gaza and the PA in the West Bank. And so if anyone ever says it's time for you guys to negotiate with the PA, they can point at Hamas in Gaza and say, nope, we have no partner for peace. You don't expect us to negotiate with these terrorists, do you? And so there's the one famous quote that you just read there, Krystal, comes from Netanyahu briefing the leaders of the Likud party in the Knesset. And again, the quote is, we have to bolster Hamas. He says, transfer them money. And that means pressuring Qatar to transfer the money, basically. And in order to what? To quote, to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state. And now here's what you do. You go to antiwar.com/Scot. Because I collect these quotes like Hot Wheels, okay? And I got about 10 or 12 of them for you from not just Netanyahu, but Bezalel Smotrich, who is his finance minister, who says the PA is a liability. Hamas is an asset. He says, in this game of delegitimization, Hamas is an asset. They can't go to the UN. They can't go to the International Criminal Court. They can't put us in a situation where we might need the U.S. to come and veto a resolution against us. They can't do nothing. And the more we have Hamas to point at, then the better situation we're in. And he even was, the question even was, yeah, but isn't Hamas dangerous? And he ends with, yeah, I don't think we need to worry about that. Just like Netanyahu in that quote that you read there, Krystal, ends with, don't worry, we control the height of the flames. And because of this imperial hubris, that's what reached out and got them on October the 7th. They thought that they had this perfectly in hand. As long as we have these good little pet terrorists in Gaza to point at and scapegoat and say, we have no partner for peace. Everybody repeat after me. We have no partner for peace. See the alliteration there? 2 P words. You know it's true. We have no partner for peace. And you can memorize it and you can repeat it so you know it's right. And it's some of the most successful Hezbollah probably in history, in fact.
Yeah, so true.
Man, dropping knowledge here, Scot Horton. You've given us an incredible amount of background here, sir. Where can people find out more about your work? Just antiwar.com/Scot?
Yes, sir. That's my latest piece. And my latest 2 pieces about the current war at antiwar.com/Scot. And I do have all the best quotes of Likud talking about why they really deliberately pursued this policy of supporting Hamas. It's called Netanyahu's support for Hamas backfired. And I'm also the director of the Libertarian Institute, and it happens to be our fund drive right now. If you like what you hear, folks, libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And I'm the author of the book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism.
Excellent. We will have a link to all of those in the description. We really appreciate you taking your time. I don't think this is the last we'll see of you, sir. So thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Great
Thank
to
you
chat
both
with you
very
again.
much. Appreciate it.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.